Awesome. Okay, so I'm Farah Harris. I am a licensed therapist, and I'm also the owner of Working Well Daily, a company dedicated on work-life alignment and helping companies improve workplace wellness. And I know that we have a limited time, so I want to make sure that I serve you well by offering you some strategies, some tactics and tips, and hopefully some encouragement to help you improve your well-being, not just for today, but all the days going forward. And so I want to start off, if you don't mind, I just want to have a conversation. At the end, I will share some slides with you that you can kind of take a quick snapshot, because I believe the material will be beneficial and you would need it somewhere, in your resources. So to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. And this is the infamous quote by James Baldwin. And usually when we see this quote, we kind of just stay there, but he goes on to say, part of the rage is this: it isn't only what is happening to you, but what is happening all around you all of the time. And a lot of stuff has been happening around us this year. 2020 has been a trip. It has been very traumatic. We started off the year with the death of Kobe and Gigi Bryant, and then all of a sudden the Rona hits the streets, and we're recognizing that it's affecting Black and brown bodies at a disproportional rate from other demographics, not because we are more susceptible to it, but because we understand the systems that are in place that do not allow us to have proper health care. And then we have to be assaulted by news and videos of our brothers and our sisters dying at the hands of police, with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud, and it's been a lot. And so the rage, the collective grief is completely natural. And I want you to know that it is natural, but we have to understand that along with that, we're dealing with racial battle fatigue, being in the workplace, and having to show up still, having still to be resilient, even after we've experienced and witnessed these atrocities. And we have to deal with microaggressions. We have to deal with, modifying ourselves and changing our behavior and code switching just so that we can survive. And so I want to kind of stay here for a second on the whole concept of code switching. There is research that shows that because we're not able to bring our authentic self, that those of us who code switch actually have more increased levels of anxiety and depression. And so what I want to encourage you, a self-care tip right now, is to make sure that you're not internalizing an external narrative. As Black folks, we will sit here and find ways to make white people comfortable and us uncomfortable. So what I tell my clients, and this goes beyond just racial matters, this is just a natural boundary information that I want to give you here, is that I want you to learn how to be comfortable in their discomfort. We have to learn how to slowly but surely, and some of you guys can go ahead and do a deep dive in, but slowly but surely start bringing our authenticity to the workplace. And historically, we know that we've had to do code switching. We know we've had to modify ourselves for our safety. But in the year of our Lord, 2020, we need to figure out how to change that narrative. The world tells us different. The world tells us we're not great. The world tells us all these things that do not do us well. And so we have to make sure that we keep that as an external issue and not internalize that. And we want to make sure that we are creating those healthy boundaries for our well-being, not just for us individually, but for our children and for our spouses and for our friends, that we continue to shine and to be present and to be seen. And so just remember, we can start learning how to be comfortable in their discomfort. And then we're going to talk about also, how do you work well while Black, especially after these last few weeks. You may be experiencing, this one group of white people who you thought were allies, you thought you had a friend, and they're silent. They're not saying anything, they're not checking on you, and you're dealing with that disappointment. And then you have the other camp of people just coming out of the woodworks. You just don't know where they are coming from. They must have found your name in a database for the company, but they're all of a sudden sliding into your DMs, or they're emailing you and checking in. Hey, wanted to see how you're doing. And that's just extremely frustrating, because all of a sudden you're seen and unseen at the same time. Story of our life, right? And so how do we manage that? How do we manage those feelings? But again, I want to make sure that I encourage you to acknowledge all of that you are experiencing, whether it's the anger and the rage, whether it's the sadness and the grief, whether it's hopelessness, whether it is anxiety or fear. All of these emotions are natural. And I want to make sure that you are giving room for those feelings to be felt. And I hope that you are also giving a place for them to be processed. And if you are the only one that hears your voice, that is enough, you know? So I want you to use your voice to acknowledge those emotions and recognize that it is difficult to work while Black. And we have to be resilient and show up and still participate on Zoom calls and meetings, and recognizing that there may be some anxiety even in that. So we're going to bring in some concepts related to COVID. Yes, there was already anxiety around the fact that there's this health pandemic. But another thing that has happened with COVID is that we have what I call a forced work-life integration. All of the roles and responsibilities that we have are like fighting for, you know, the same time in the same space, that we're all the things all of the time. And our home as Black folks, traditionally, is supposed to be our place of respite, right? It's supposed to be the place where we can relax, and we can, you know, lay our head down and feel good. But now, because many of us are sheltering in place, we have to open up our laptops and show ourselves on video and literally let this white world, this white corporate space or creative space, wherever it is that we're working, that's predominantly a white environment, into our home. And that could also be increasing your anxiety. You become more hyper aware of your Blackness. You know, maybe what you would wear at home more often than not is not necessarily how you would show up in the workplace. And so having those moments, I want you to just be aware of it and not to shrink or try to compensate, you know, going back to the code switching and the work identity that we've created, but learn how to, again, be comfortable and stay comfortable in your space while the white people figure out how to navigate that. Another issue with working while Black is that sometimes you can be lonely because you may be the only one, and so you're dealing with isolation. You also deal with the frustration of having to be the voice to represent all people because somehow we're monolithic. No. And you also have to deal with the fact that you are, you have to prove yourself. You know, so, and all of these are like catch-22s, because if you're trying to prove yourself by maybe working later hours and trying to be on all of the projects, it can turn, you know, things on its head by being viewed as someone who's incompetent. That's why you have to work like long hours, or that you are just all over the place and are not focused. So it doesn't always work well for us. So I want to help you today to really understand how boundaries really help us in our mental well-being and in our self-care. Now, you also may be wrestling with, how do I communicate with my manager, my supervisor, you know, or my leader about how they've been handling what's been going on the last 3 weeks? So I want to give you a few tips. One, the first question I want you to ask yourself is, why do you even want to share? And not in a judgmental way. I really want you to think about, what will be the purpose of this dialogue? How do you want to shape the conversation? What is your end goal? And this is not just, again, for race-related conversations. This is an emotional intelligence skill so that you can be an effective communicator. Don't lead with feelings, lead with facts. So make sure that you already have constructed in your mind where you want the conversation to go and go forward with that. So always know your why. It is frustrating when you're having a dialogue with someone and you are figuring out in the conversation where you want to go, okay? 2, recognize and assess, is this even a safe person or a safe company to bring up this issue? Has your HR department or has your leader historically handled constructive criticism well? Have they handled controversial issues well? If it's not, if there's history where that has not been the factor and that has not been the case, then I would encourage you to not have the conversation. 3, if you want to have a conversation with them, not just about what's been happening in current events, but your experience as a whole in that company with dealing with microaggressions or racial biases, I want to make sure you come with receipts. Make sure you come with at least 1 to 2 different examples of when you have experienced some kind of, again, racial bias or yes, receipts, Bennett. You know, you want to make sure that you have something tangible for them to be able to go like, okay, so make sure you're documenting everything. And then 4, if it gets too hot, get out the kitchen. It will not be productive to have a conversation, to keep going in a conversation that turns left. So you can go, hey, let's circle back. Let's table this right now. When we have cooler heads, you know, maybe we can talk about this again tomorrow. But again, it just doesn't make sense to continue a conversation that will end up being more contentious and both people end up not having the benefit of the goal that they're trying to achieve. And 5, but most importantly, process this elsewhere. Process with a partner, process with a therapist, process your emotions in a safe space so that, again, you're not bringing it to work and processing it with someone or in an environment that's not safe. So as I said, I want to make sure that you guys are acknowledging all the emotions that you're feeling. We're going through so much right now, and the state of rage that James Baldwin talks about, we have to make sure that it doesn't consume us, right? We have to make sure that we do something with the rage. So as the world is burning, stay hydrated, fill your cup. Make sure you are taking time to do things that serve you well. We want to make sure that we are my definition of self-care is the daily intentional act of creating a life you don't want to run away from. And that doesn't mean that self-care makes you happy. That doesn't make, it doesn't mean that self-care absolves all of the pain that we're going through. It just makes sure that you're able to maintain, right? And so stay hydrated, stay taking care of yourself. There's research that shows that those who are protesters, those who are on the front lines of movements, usually are running at like 120, like all the time, all day, every day, and they burn out. And once they burn out, they don't go and rest and recover and come back to the work. They stay away. We don't want that. We need to move forward on purpose and with purpose. And I know for myself, I even had to take a break. I think it was a few days after the George Floyd video was released, I had to delete Twitter, I had to delete Facebook, because I recognized I still had to be a mom. I still had to be a wife. I still had to show up for my clients. I still had to serve and live and thrive even in the midst of all this. So sometimes even guilt might be an emotion that you're having, a guilt for having joy. And it is important for us to have joy because our spirits cannot sit in grief and in pain for too long. It will just kill us inside. We will just end up shrinking and no longer being productive. And so real quick, I want to share my screen with you guys on a few items. Let me see. There we go. Here we go. So for our kids, I want to make sure that you understand that we need to also mind their mind and guard their hearts. So having conversations around what is going on is important, but I want you to lead the conversation with positive self-identity. Let them know that there are beautiful Black boys, beautiful Black girls. And then if you're a person of faith, lead the conversation also with speaking truth to how God views them, that they're fearfully and wonderfully made, and the view of man is a lie and it's not true. Leading with this strong sense of self helps to, again, balance the conversation so that they're not overwhelmed by the lies that society gives us. Again, not internalizing that external narrative. And you want to make sure that you also limit what they see. So just like I said about being careful on being on social media for too long, you don't need to know all the things all the time, and your kids don't either. So protect them in that way so they can continue to have some level of innocence. And then equip them with emotional language, allow them to grow and build their emotional vocabulary, but also leaving room and space for them to process. And if they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to talk about it. But if they do, give them a safe space for them to do that, because we want them to be healthy adults that can process and articulate their emotions well. So here are some basic tips on how you can maintain your mental health in general, as a person, as a human being. Participate in activities that affirm your Blackness. Make sure you go to therapy. Of course, I'm a therapist. I advocate for that. It's a wonderful investment of personal development. Make sure that you are taking time to journal, to process your emotions, practicing good sleep hygiene, because I know in the midst of all of this, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. In the midst of all of this, many of our sleep patterns have been thrown off because of increased anxiety. So doing a mental dump, i.e., jotting down all the things that are in your head before you go to sleep, is usually very helpful. Meditate, make sure that you're, eating well. Some of you may have decided to, eat things to comfort you. Be careful with that. Make sure that you're doing, you're watching what you're eating so that you're hydrating and nourishing your body to be well. Because we will get out of this at some point, we will. And we want to make sure that we get out well and not worn. Some apps, the top 3 apps are actually created and designed for Black people: Liberate Meditation, Elevate Inspirational Living, and Jasper Light. The others are also great apps. Calm is a very popular one. Headspace, Abide is a Christian meditation app. And then if you want to find a therapist, you can see if your company offers an EAP program, which offers usually on average 3 to 6 free sessions on the company's dime. But if you're looking for a therapist and you really want to make sure you can find a person, a Black person or a person of color, the list here is all for you. The last 2 are especially for those who are Black and identify as queer. And some books. The Memo by Minda Harts is an excellent book. It's specifically for Black women, but I think it's just a great book overall for any Black person that is in the workspace who desires to elevate in the corporate world. But then also it's a great book for allies to read as well. And then the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. These are 2 white brothers. This book is phenomenal. I make sure all my clients have it. It's great for us to understand how important boundaries are in all the different areas in our lives that we can implement boundaries. And if you want to get in touch with me, I'm available via social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, at Farah Harris, LCPC. My website's farahharrislcpc.com. If you want to email me, shoot me an email at info@workingwell.com. And I also have a Facebook group specifically about helping individuals create better work-life alignment and self-care, and that's called Working Well Daily. So if you have any questions, I would love to be able to talk with you guys about whatever it is that you have on your mind.
Hey, for everybody in this session, make sure to add your questions to the chat, and I'll make sure to have Farah see them to answer. So the line is open now, and remember, there's still the main stage stuff after this, so get them in quickly. Or if anybody wants to raise their hand, I think there's an option for that. Can definitely be part of this conversation as well. And I can unmute you. I guess since I'm waiting, I feel like I have a question for you.
Okay.
I just launched a nonprofit a couple of days ago, and every white person in America is like, how can I help? How can I be an ally? And it's such a lot of energy for me.
Mhm.
This nonprofit is built to advocate and advance Black talent through advertising. So just super curious, like,
Mhm.
you know, as somebody who helps people kind of like maintain their sense of self, and but like, you know, you're you know you're a community person. Like I am
Yeah.
now explicitly a community person. How do I guess survival tips, right? Because we all have to look out for each other. We all have to hold space for something much larger than ourselves.
Yeah, I think we are being definitely overwhelmed by the desire for allies to, hence the name of today's summit, allies in action. Like,
Hmm.
how can I put my allyship in action? At the same time, we as Black people are like, okay, well, we've been waiting for y'all, but at the same time, it's overwhelming. And so I
Hmm.
would encourage you to figure out, where would you need their help, to assess what are your needs, and once you recognize what your needs are, then to say, let me follow back up with you, once I figure this out, and then bring them in. I think right now, there's just a lot of guilt, that we end up taking on ourselves, and we're almost burdened by them processing their emotions and them waking up, so to speak, to all the things that we've been rallying about and talking about. And so I would say, just as you're growing your business, is to, again, set those boundaries so that you create the time, for when you want that engagement, that you understand what is your emotional bandwidth, what can you handle, and what do you may need to kind of table until a later time. But understanding, like, okay, if I'm doing this business, what is the goal of the business? What are the needs of the business? And so if I can be aware of those needs, then I can figure out, does Anna, have capabilities to help me in this area? Does Jeff have capabilities to help me with this area? So then, maybe even having them let you know what their skill set is, so that you're able to properly assess how they can be utilized for the benefit of your company.
For sure, for sure. All right, so we've got a question from Curves.
Mm-hmm.
Some What are some tips to cope, react, or not internalize in majority white spaces?
First, recognize how you're feeling in the moment. When we are in those spaces, our natural reaction is to go into safety mode. So we're like, I have to protect myself, and because I know the story that they're playing is dot 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 dot. Taking time to make sure that you are affirming who you are, recognizing your integrity, your character, your personhood outside of their narrative of what your Blackness means, is important. So if someone, sadly, I had a worker who, I'm sorry, a neighbor who was on a Zoom call with her church, I think. And during the call, there were someone who kind of like got in somehow and started, putting the N word out, and talking about Trump or whatever. And they were assaulted, pretty much while they were thinking they were in a safe space. And it hurt her and it broke her. And I get it. But the thing is, it's not true. Racism is a white people problem. There's nothing wrong with our melanin. There's nothing wrong with the pigmentation, of our skin. It is this mental hierarchy that has been created by white people, historically, that makes us feel othered or makes us feel less than. Working on identifying what your truth is and what the truth is that we're human beings. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. We're enough. And we're valuable and worthy. And so being able to can just again, almost like Control Alt Delete that narrative that they try to give you and try to give us. And it's a daily practice because we have learned inherently from our parents or from society historically just to shrink and to modify ourselves. And so if it is something that you recognize, like, oh man, I kind of changed the way I walk when I'm in white spaces, or I changed the way I do my hair, you know, when I'm in white spaces, what would it look like to just try one thing that is authentically you and bring that to to your workplace? Doing stuff like that and kind of like flexing your courage muscle. Like my girlfriend says this all the time. She's like, flexing your courage muscle to just be you, I think is very important. I thought I saw another question come up. Oh, okay. You're welcome. It takes practice. It's hard. I believe that my workplace is a safe space. I work with really great people. We are a small company with about 14 employees, and I am one of 3 minorities. I hate that term, by the way, minorities. But as someone in leadership, I think we have a great environment to have these radical conversations. However, I wonder what is the first step in doing that? And I also battle with the dichotomy of wanting to talk about it and not talk about it at the same time. Yeah, I've been easing into it with icebreaker questions at morning meetings that indirectly touch on this. Okay. Thanks, Tia. Is there a question in there that I missed? I'm so sorry. Oh, Heather, yes. Okay, so Heather's asking about struggling with the trust factor. Okay, trust, whether it's with white people or with anybody else, period, is based off of receipts. You know, you have to prove yourself over and over again to be trustworthy. To be or to interact gingerly is completely normal. You want to be hopeful. I heard, I think you also say, even at church, you know, you want to be hopeful that your brothers and sisters that you serve with and that you worship with would be safe, but you know that they're probably not fully safe with your heart. I would make sure that you don't set necessarily firm boundaries that doesn't allow the good in, but that you do set some healthy boundaries by watching the consistency of their character and consistency of their actions. I don't think that's Tia's question. I think that, oh, yes. Okay. Okay, sorry. There was a lot there, Tia. I guess going back to the point earlier on where do you want the conversation to go? What would be your end goal will help guide those questions, because I understand not wanting to talk about it and wanting to talk about it because you know it's important. This is your lived experience. What would be the goal? You say that you work in a very relatively safe environment. If it is a safe environment, what is I would want you to kind of do that self-reflection. What is the hesitancy of bringing this up? Do you believe that if you bring up issues regarding race, it will become a more unsafe environment, that it will create some controversy or conflict? Because if that's the case, then maybe it's not as safe as you think it is. Because if it's truly safe and you truly have allies that are working with you, then they would be open to having the dialogue and each person stretching one another and growing in learning together. But if you feel that the conversation may go to a place that will create a more tense work environment, then that's kind of like another thing to process.